Lemmy Kilmister spent 40 years as the loudest voice in rock and roll. But behind the leather jacket and cigarettes was a man who truly hated some of music's biggest names. He called the Rolling Stones "Mummy's Boys" and banned certain bands from his presence. In 2004, he got into such a heated fight with one famous group that security had to pull them apart. His anger went deeper than music. It came from betrayal, from being thrown out at a German border while bandmates watched. The feuds he started would last until his final breath in 2015. Ian Fraser Kilmister was born on Christmas Eve 1945 in the town of Stoke-on-Trent, England. But just 3 months after his birth, his father walked out. He had been a concert pianist and an Air Force chaplain, but to young Ian, he was just a ghost. His mother, June, was left alone to raise him with help from his grandmother. Life felt shaky from the very beginning. When Ian turned 10, his mother married a man named George Willis, a former rugby player. He brought 2 kids from his earlier marriage. Ian never liked them. The family then moved to a quiet farm in Benlec, on the Isle of Anglesey in Wales. But this new place didn't bring peace. It only made him feel more like an outsider. He went to a school in Amlwch, where he was the only English boy among hundreds of Welsh kids. The bullying was relentless. The kids mocked him, pushed him out, and made him feel like he didn't belong. It was around this time he picked up the nickname Lemmy. No one agrees on how it started. Some said it was because he always asked people to "Lemmy a quid till Friday" to feed his addiction to slot machines. Lemmy himself later admitted he didn't even remember where the name came from, but it stuck, and so did the scars. He was soon expelled. The world had already decided he was a misfit, so he leaned into it. Everything changed in 1963 when he saw the Beatles live at the Cavern Club. He was 16, and watching them up close shook him to his core. He went home and started teaching himself how to play guitar by copying every note from their debut album, Please Please Me. He said the Beatles weren't soft like people thought. They were tough Liverpool boys who could handle themselves in the streets. He called the Rolling Stones "Mummy's Boys" by comparison. That concert was the moment he knew what he wanted to do with his life. Around that same age, Lemmy also discovered girls. Teenage holidaymakers visiting Anglesey became his first real romantic experiences. One girl from Stockport changed everything for him. After she returned home, he followed her there. He was just 16 and already willing to chase what he wanted, even if it meant leaving his whole life behind. That move wasn't just about love. It was about escaping. It was the start of a pattern, chasing music, chasing women, and never looking back. But running away didn't mean life got easier. After dropping out of school, Lemmy lived on the edge of homelessness. He worked brutal factory jobs in the 1960s just to survive. One of them was at a Hot Point appliance plant in Conwy. He also cleaned horse stables and picked up whatever jobs he could. But he never let go of the dream. He played guitar every free moment he had. That hunger, that grinding poverty, gave him the kind of rough edge that connected with working-class fans for the rest of his life. In 1964, when he was 19, he finally started performing in bands. He joined 2 small R&B groups, the Rainmakers and the Motown Sect, playing pubs and clubs in northern England. The gigs were dirty, the pay was low, and the crowds were rowdy. Fights were normal. The music never led anywhere commercially. None of the bands got signed. Lemmy didn't care. He was learning. He realized most bands fail, but he wasn't going to stop. Then, in 1967, he got the job that changed everything. He moved to London and became a roadie for the Jimi Hendrix Experience. For 8 months, Lemmy worked closely with Hendrix, and shared a flat with Noel Redding and the road manager. He set up gear, handled amps, and watched genius up close. He also saw the chaos, the drugs, the pressure, the burnout. He said Hendrix made him realize he'd never be that good on guitar. So he started thinking about switching to bass. But before he got there, something nearly killed him. A nurse friend had stolen what she thought was speed from her workplace, and Lemmy took a huge spoonful. But it wasn't speed. It was atropine, and he took 200 times the safe amount. He hallucinated wildly, cuddling a TV and talking to it like it was alive. When he woke up in the hospital, doctors told him he'd barely survived. For weeks, he kept seeing things that weren't real, pages in books that didn't exist. It didn't scare him off drugs, but it did make him more careful. In 1965, Lemmy joined a band called the Rockin' Vickers. They wore crazy costumes on stage and even became the first British band to tour communist Yugoslavia. They recorded 4 singles, including one with the famous producer Shel Talmy, and got some attention in Finland. But none of their songs became big hits in the UK. After 3 years of grinding, the band broke up in 1968. It was Lemmy's first real taste of failure in the music industry, and it wouldn't be his last. There was also a more personal story hidden in these early years. When Lemmy was just 17, he got a girl named Kathy pregnant. Their child, Sean, was given up for adoption. Lemmy knew about the boy, but never reached out. In later interviews, he dismissed it, saying it wasn't a big deal, and that growing up with a single mother was a good enough start in life. But deep down, it mirrored his own childhood, a father who left and a boy left wondering. Lemmy never tried to make contact with Sean. That wound remained open. In 1971, everything took another strange turn. Hawkwind, a psychedelic rock band, asked him to join. Their bassist had vanished before a gig, so Lemmy stepped in, even though he had never played bass before in his life. He had only come to audition as a guitarist, but they didn't want another guitar player. What they did want, oddly enough, was someone who liked speed, the drug. Lemmy fit perfectly. He grabbed the bass and invented his own playing style, using chords and heavy rhythms like a guitarist would. It didn't sound like anything else. It sounded like Lemmy. By 1972, Hawkwind released Silver Machine, their biggest hit ever. It climbed to number 3 on the UK charts. Lemmy wasn't even supposed to sing it, but when the band's frontman got sick, their manager picked Lemmy instead. His raw voice gave the song its edge. They recorded it live during a show at the Roundhouse, while Lemmy was high. The song was re-released several times in later years and kept charting, but success brought problems. Lemmy's playing style clashed with the band's trippy sound. He wanted grit, not floating synths. The tension kept growing. Lemmy Kilmister was fired from Hawkwind in May 1975 after being arrested for drug possession in Canada. He later said they kicked him out because he was using the wrong drugs. But instead of slowing down, Lemmy acted immediately. He formed a new band and named it Motorhead, after the last song he wrote for Hawkwind. His vision was loud, fast, and wild. He wanted it to feel like a punch to the face, something raw and dangerous like MC5. Lemmy brought in Larry Wallace on guitar and Lucas Fox on drums. They rehearsed at a rundown spot in Chelsea and were so broke they stole gear from the furniture shop above. They played their first gig on July 20th, 1975, opening for Greenslade at the Roundhouse. Hardly anyone was watching. They recorded their first album, On Parole, in 1976 at Rockfield Studios, but the label didn't like it. They shelved it for years. Lemmy was crushed. Nothing was working. The band was falling apart. Lucas Fox was unreliable. And during those same sessions, Phil Taylor came in to replace him. A few months later, Fast Eddie Clarke joined on guitar, and right after that, Wallace quit. Just like that, the classic trio was born. Lemmy, Eddie, and Phil became the soul of Motorhead. Still, the album stayed buried until late 1979, when the band finally found success. In the middle of all that, Lemmy nearly died. In 1976, he overdosed so badly that his blood couldn't be pumped. He lived on a mix of Jack Daniels, speed, and cigarettes. He said later he'd seen over 300 friends die from drugs. That year almost broke him. The band had no money, no fans, and no record deal. Lemmy thought about quitting, but somehow he kept going. Their first big gig came in October 1975 when they opened for Blue Oyster Cult at Hammersmith Odeon. The hall was only half full. Nobody cared yet, but they were so loud and so fast that people started noticing. Music magazines didn't know what to do with them. In 1976, NME called them the best worst band in the world. That stung, but it also helped. They were building something. In August 1977, their debut album finally came out, not On Parole, but a new one called Motorhead. It was recorded in just a few days. Everything was raw and full of energy. That was the first time the world saw their war pig mascot, Snaggletooth. The album reached number 43 in the UK. It was rough, loud, and very real. Suddenly, they were part punk, part metal, and something entirely their own. Then came the real breakthrough. In 1979, they released Overkill and then Bomber. Both charted. They toured with punk legends like The Damned. Lemmy even played with them briefly. Audiences went wild. Lemmy's bass hung low, and his voice sounded like gravel and fire. By now, they were known as the loudest band in the world. But even with their rise, things weren't easy. Their most famous song, Ace of Spades, came out in 1980. It reached number 15 and made them legends. But Lemmy hated it. He played it every night, but grew sick of it. He said fans acted like that was the only song they had. Even though it brought them fame, he felt trapped by it. That same decade, Lemmy became known for something else, his wild lifestyle. In the 1980s, he said he'd been with over 1,000 women. He refused to settle down. He was honest about it too, writing in his memoir that he once cried in joy after seeing a 16-year-old groupie strip in front of him. His hotel nights were filled with women, music, and booze. He treated those encounters like badges of honor. In June 1981, something unbelievable happened. Motorhead's live album No Sleep Till Hammersmith shot straight to number 1 on the UK Albums Chart. That had never happened to them before. Most of the songs were recorded at Newcastle City Hall just a few months earlier, on March 30th. The fans were loud, the band was louder, and it felt like nothing could stop them. The single Motorhead from that album even climbed to number 6 on the UK singles chart by July 3rd. That moment was the peak of their career. They had just come off the success of Ace of Spades in 1980, and now they were being called heavy metal legends. Years later, the Daily Telegraph would call that album the greatest live album of all time. But strangely, Lemmy himself once said it wasn't even his favorite. Still, that number 1 spot in 1981 was proof of how far they'd come after 5 years of non-stop touring. But things didn't stay perfect for long. In May 1982, their classic lineup fell apart. Guitarist Eddie Clarke suddenly quit in the middle of their American tour. His last show with them was at the New York Palladium on May 14th. It all started falling apart during a recording session with Wendy O. Williams and her band, the Plasmatics. They were trying to record an EP called Stand By Your Man, and Eddie hated the whole thing. He thought Wendy's singing was awful, and he felt like the project was going against what Motorhead stood for. Lemmy said Eddie wasn't even playing guitar during the session, just trying to produce, while other guitarists filled in. At one point, Eddie walked out of the studio and said he was just going out to get food. But they found him sitting alone in another room. Later, Eddie denied he quit on his own. He said, "Notice I do not call it leaving, as it was not my choice. I had imagined dying on stage with Motorhead." After he left, they brought in Brian Robertson from Thin Lizzy, but everyone knew it was the end of an era. Just 2 years later, in 1984, Lemmy's body started giving out. After years of heavy drinking, he collapsed. Doctors diagnosed him with diabetes. He had no choice but to change how he drank. He switched from whiskey to vodka, mixed with orange juice, to try and control his blood sugar. Even then, he didn't stop. In a 2005 interview, he proudly said he was the most drunken diabetic in the world, while pouring himself another drink. The irony hit hard. The man who built his name on living fast and dying young was now having to pace himself. Diabetes stayed with him for the rest of his life, but he still toured, still played, still drank. This was just the first of many health scares he'd face, but somehow he kept going. He made it all the way to 70 years old, shocking everyone. That 1982 project with Wendy O. Williams didn't just push Eddie out, it left a permanent scar. Lemmy liked Wendy's wild stage shows. She used to chainsaw guitars in half on stage, but the rest of the band didn't want anything to do with it. When they tried recording in Toronto, it was a mess. Wendy couldn't sing in tune, and they had to do take after take just to get through it. Even the producer added stress. Lemmy jokingly called him Evil Red Dick. It wasn't just a studio problem, they took the chaos to the stage too. In 1985, Wendy even performed live with Motorhead at Camden Palace in London. But by then, the damage was already done. Eddie was gone, and the band's unity had been broken. That whole project exposed how different everyone's vision really was. Still, Lemmy didn't regret it. He liked working with people who pushed limits, even if it meant risking everything. Then came one of the strangest stories Lemmy ever told. In 1986 interviews, he revealed something from 1980 that almost no one knew. He'd overdosed on heroin. It was shocking because Lemmy always hated heroin. He talked about it with disgust since the early 70s. He thought it was miserable and joyless. But in 1980, something went wrong. He collapsed and looked completely lifeless. His friends thought he was dead. They even drew a chalk outline around his body, like in a crime scene. Then, out of nowhere, Lemmy opened his eyes and started laughing. Everyone was stunned. In his book, White Line Fever, he later explained how much he hated heroin, calling it miserable and no fun at all. Even in 1994, he sent a fax saying heroin addicts always die in a pool of their own blood with embolisms behind their knees, and they always break your fucking heart. That overdose didn't make him stop using drugs entirely. He kept using amphetamines and drinking, but he never touched heroin again. It was one of the darkest moments in the band's early days and showed just how dangerous their world really was. Lemmy Kilmister was never afraid to take risks. In 1991, when the music world was changing fast and grunge was wiping out glam metal, he did something nobody expected. He released Motorhead's 9th album, called 1916. It had ballads, keyboards, and even cellos. One track, Love Me Forever, showed a softer side, and the title track was about soldiers in World War I. People were shocked. The album became a surprise success. It hit number 24 on the UK charts and finally put Motorhead on the US Billboard list. The song The One to Sing the Blues reached number 45, and the album got a Grammy nomination in 1992. Even though Metallica won that year, The nomination proved that Lemmy, now 46, still mattered. He could evolve, but he never let go of that raw Motorhead sound. The 2000s were harder. His body was breaking down after years of pushing it. In 2000, while touring in Italy, he collapsed and had to be hospitalized. He had the flu, exhaustion, and a lung infection. In 2005, he ended up in a German hospital again, this time from severe dehydration. The voice everyone knew, that famous gravel sound, was falling apart. Lemmy had smoked since he was 11, 2 packs a day for decades. He also sang with his head tilted back, which damaged his throat even more. By 2015, he tried to cut down. He dropped to just 1 pack a week, but it was too late. That summer, he was hospitalized again, struggling to breathe. On stage, it became clear that his body wasn't keeping up with his will. He didn't slow down. He wouldn't. But the signs were everywhere. Then came 2013. Lemmy had heart problems so serious, doctors had to put a defibrillator inside him. All those years of using speed had finally taken a toll. Just weeks later, he developed a hematoma and had to cancel tour dates. When he returned to the stage, he was thinner, walking with a cane, and visibly weaker. At Wacken Festival, he tried to play, but had to leave the stage early. Fans were heartbroken, but Lemmy kept going. He called his refusal to quit dogged insolence. Even when he said in interviews that he was dying, he laughed it off. He hated getting old. He said it was the worst thing that could happen to anyone. And even when doctors begged him to stop, he wouldn't give up the life he had lived for over 40 years. And then there was the side of Lemmy few dared to cross. He didn't just dislike certain bands, he hated them. He had deep resentment for The Clash, calling them fake rebels from fancy backgrounds. They sounded like old music dressed up as punk, he said in 2009. He praised the Ramones, but thought The Clash were just pretending to be angry. In his eyes, they hadn't suffered enough to write real rock. He said the same about the Rolling Stones. He called them Mummy's Boys and said their concerts were awful. He once watched them play in Hyde Park in 1969 and said Mick Jagger was out of tune and wearing a dress. To Lemmy, the Beatles were the real deal. They were working class, and their music changed the world. He couldn't stand nu metal either. Bands like Limp Bizkit and Tool were everything he disliked about the 1990s. He thought they were about trends, not truth. They didn't write from pain or life. They followed formulas. He felt the same about Radiohead and Coldplay. These are not rock bands, he said in 2010. These are sub-emo. Even when someone said Radiohead had evolved, he rolled his eyes. Fair enough, he admitted, but it's not rock and roll. Lemmy said he knew real rock when he heard it. He'd been listening since he was 12. His anger had a deeper source. In 1975, Lemmy was kicked out of the band Hawkwind. It wasn't just a fight. They left him at the German border for getting caught with amphetamines, while the rest of the band used different drugs. Lemmy had written their biggest hits, but they threw him out anyway. That betrayal never left him. It made him chase something pure, something real. That's why he formed Motorhead. That's why he couldn't stand fake bands or image-driven acts. Everything had to be honest. That was the only rule. Even in his final years, the anger burned. In 2004, after The Darkness became famous, he called them a novelty act. When their singer used high falsetto vocals, Lemmy said it was just showy nonsense. They actually banned him from one of their LA shows. It got so tense that Dave Grohl had to step in and make peace. They finally met at the Rainbow Bar and ended the fight. But he never made peace with bands like Tool or Marilyn Manson. He called Tool hopeless and said the US rock scene was full of fads. He thought Manson had style but no substance. Fair play to him for getting up people's noses, he said. but he needs to come up with a few decent tunes. On December 13, 2015, Lemmy turned 70. His friends threw him a huge party at the Whiskey A Go Go in Los Angeles. Just 2 days later, he felt chest pains and was rushed to the hospital. Doctors ran tests, and what they found was devastating. He had cancer. It had already spread to his brain and neck. On December 26th, they told him he had 2 to 6 months left. Lemmy's reply was quiet. "Oh, only 2 months, huh?" His doctor didn't sugarcoat it. "It's bad, and there's nothing anyone can do." His team brought his favorite video game console from the Rainbow Bar to his apartment. On December 28th, just 48 hours after the diagnosis, Lemmy died in his sleep. He had prostate cancer, cardiac arrhythmia, and heart failure. The rock world was crushed. But there was something else. Behind the legend, behind the loud music and leather jackets, Lemmy had regrets. In his last interviews, he admitted one thing that still haunted him. He was a father, but he hadn't been there. He had at least 3 sons. Paul Inder, his son with a woman in Los Angeles, became a music producer. Another child had been adopted and lost legal ties to Lemmy. A third might have existed, born from a relationship with a French woman, though even Lemmy wasn't sure. He once said the child didn't look like him, or like the other possible father either. Maybe it was a third party, he joked. After his death, the world expected he had left behind millions. But when they checked, his net worth was only about $528,000. Most of his money had gone into the same things that powered his image: whiskey, drugs, and non-stop living. He never owned a mansion. He rented a small Hollywood apartment for over 20 years. That's where he died.